This video was not sponsored by Decathlon. Hi, and welcome back to my channel. And yes, I did get a new haircut. Thank you for noticing. So, fencing is one of the most visually appealing sports, and it's also one of the oldest sports in existence, and that is the reason why in a lot of TV series and films there are scenes in which people are fencing. And fencing scenes have always fascinated me, and it's one of the reasons why I started fencing myself. But on one hand, you've got a very old sport with a lot of history and a lot of rules, and on the other hand, you have Hollywood, who just loves to pay attention to detail. So now looking back on those fencing scenes that inspired me to go fencing myself, let's take a look at some fencing scenes from famous movies and TV series. So we're first going to look at a scene from the movie Die Another Day, where James Bond fights against a guy called Graves. So,
best of 3 hits.
Okay, so first, Graves does not salute, which goes like this. This. So what you're doing is you're showing your opponent as well as the referee and anyone who's watching that your blade is clean and that it is not smeared with blood. And that is basically to avoid, if someone gets wounded, that they get blood poisoning. And it is one of the primary rules of fencing. And if you fail to salute during an official match, you actually lose a point. Okay, but I also saw that Bond, he did salute, but I didn't do it properly, because he puts on a mask and then he salutes and then he proceeds with the match. But you actually have to put your mask underneath your arm and then salute, and that is just so that you can look your opponent in the eye as a form of respect. But yeah, let's just go into the fighting scene itself. Okay, so there are really quick cuts, and that makes it quite hard to see whether they are fencing correctly, but what I can see is that they are standing correctly, they're doing the footwork correctly, and also they are using the correct methods with the correct weapon, because there's different rules and different methods related to each different weapon in fencing. Okay. So that really makes me happy. And then they continue on to sword fights. Okay, so fencing and sword fighting are very, very different things. I know it looks very similar, of course, because you're both using swords. But in fencing, you really pay attention to technique, and a lot is about footwork. It's a bit like ballet, whilst in sword fighting, it's really just about hurting your opponent before they can hurt you. So the level of technique and the level of art, in a way, just gets lost. But I can throw my media degrees at this and analyze this scene that Graves is acting like a gentleman, doing fencing, doing it very fancy and then he sheds his facade, turning into a brute and actually going into the sword fighting, which is just but yeah, I don't actually know this film. I've never seen it, and I don't know who this guy is, but I assume that he is the villain. So, if I have to put this movie on a tier list, I would say that this is B tier. They followed some of the rules, not completely, and they used a rather cheap method of quick cuts and partially concealing the match by people walking across the camera. But it is a very good scene overall. And I also really like that they're using a pace, because that is just the best fencing weapon, if I might say so myself. So let's get on to the next video, which is Wednesday. Okay, so I already saw on TikTok very early on, I think it was like a teaser trailer, that they were going to do fencing in Wednesday, and I was really excited for it until I saw the scene myself. Okay, first of all, aesthetics, really love it. Of course, you're not allowed to just walk straight through a room where people are fencing, because that's really, really dangerous. But it is Wednesday. It is a level of like suspension of disbelief. But what I actually want to talk about first, because that is the first thing that I saw when I saw this clip, is the suit color, as to say. Because when you think about fencing, you immediately have in mind a white costume. And well, actually, according to the Athlete Handbook in 2013 to 2014, a white fencing suit is actually not mandatory anymore. You actually are allowed to wear a different color vest. You're allowed to decorate it with patches. You can do actually whatever you want. But it is a bit of a taboo to wear a different color of vest, mainly because it is a part of tradition. It is showing a level of respect for the fencing history. But what's also very interesting is that the origin of the white vest, or the white costume in its total, has a very bloody origin. So fencing and dueling was actually banned in France during the 16th century, and there was still illegal duels being held for your honor. I mean, that is a huge part of the Three Musketeers. And in these duels, it was the point that you would win if you were the first one to draw the blood of your opponent. And that is where the white comes in, because white would show blood the very first time. And that is why it actually became the chosen color for fencing. And it later actually evolved into not showing that someone has bled for a point, but actually showing that someone is bleeding because they are actually wounded. And that is a level of safety, basically. But that is actually not official anymore. So with such a bloody history, and also having a level of respect for tradition, I would actually think that Wednesday would prefer to wear the white uniform and inform everyone that this was the history of fencing, of the white uniform. That people would say, I thought you would be wearing black, and Wednesday would be like, well, actually, it shows if you're bleeding, you know? That would just be more in character, I think. But I mean, still the aesthetics. I really want a black fencing suit right now. Okay, so what I am seeing right now is... Okay, so... Okay. In fencing, like I said, you have different weapons, and to each weapon you have your own rules and your own methods. So you have the foil, you have the épée, and you have the saber. Now, you can see in this scene that everyone is fighting with a saber. And there's a huge difference between the fighting method of the saber, the épée, and the foil. Fighting with the saber goes very fast, and fencers like to slash with the weapon as well as stab. And when you're fighting with an épée, however, the fighting technique is much slower, and you're only allowed to use the tip of the weapon. And you just more go back and forth. It's more like it is more the sword fighting that you see in movies and TV series, whilst saber is just like bam, and it's it's done. And what they are actually doing in this scene is they are having that back and forth. They are actually doing a bit. I mean, the technique is just completely wrong. Oh, so you have this close up, and the saber changes into a foil, which again is a completely different weapon, completely different rules. Also, they didn't greet. What's the problem with people and failing to greet? Where has the respect gone? Where is the etiquette? Where is the je ne sais quoi? Okay, so that is a point for Wednesday. A perfect point. I mean, really, really well done. And then, oh, they immediately start fencing. When you have made a point, you just go to the middle again and start the match, and not start where they did, like at the very edge of it, because Wednesday would be at a huge disadvantage, because she has like less space left. This is ridiculous. I mean, is this fencing teacher even paying attention?
That first point was clearly beginner's luck. Let's finish this.
For the final point, I would like to invoke a military challenge.
Invoke a military challenge. I've never heard of that.
Blood.
The winner draws first blood. Girl, you are wearing black.
It's your decision, Bianca.
Let's see if you bleed in black and white.
Okay. Yeah, to this point, the match just goes completely fantasy, which would be fine if they would have gotten the basics right. But I mean, apparently they didn't even bother to ask like one person who may have some knowledge about fencing, being like, "We are going to use these weapons. How do you fight with those?" Which is really disappointing, because you can see that they had a lot of budget, and people who love fencing would definitely tell you for free, because they don't shut up about it. But I still love the series, though. I want to know that it's a really good series. But just this one scene, especially because like the Addams family, Gomez Addams is really involved with fencing, and I believe later in the series Gomez talks about Wednesday having been taught fencing from a very early age, and then they just completely get the fencing wrong, and you're just like, why? But yeah, let's get into the... Oh no, first, where would I place it on my tier? I would go for the F tier. I'm very sorry, they couldn't even get the basics right. So yeah, but let's move on to Bridgerton. This is actually a very interesting scene to watch, because it is set in a different time period, and it's actually set in the 18th century, where which is a century where a lot of things changed in fencing. So okay, first of all, they are fencing without a mask. Don't do that. And you might think this is a completely different time. Maybe they didn't have masks yet. But actually, masks became rather popular in the 18th century. Although the old style of fencing was still being used, where they didn't use fencing masks. And that was a method where people would fight like this, because you don't want your face to get hurt, especially if you are fighting with like a sharp end of a weapon. You're just like, and it's a really well, there's a reason why we use masks now, because fighting like this just completely throws off your balance and you just have a huge disadvantage whilst fencing. Okay, so what I really wanted to talk about is the outfit. What they are wearing in this scene are the classic, I believe, yeah, Regency. They are wearing the Regency underclothes. They're even wearing a men's corset, which I really love. But they actually did have, in that time, have fencing clothes more similar to ours. So that is actually what Anthony is wearing. He's wearing a vest with padding, very similar to what I'm wearing right now. Why the other brothers aren't wearing any of the vests, I don't know. It just goes to show perhaps that Anthony is more a person who follows the rules, whilst Benedict and Colin are more loosely spirited people. I don't know. What I also really like is their weapon, because as you might see, they don't have a foil, épée or saber. What they're actually using is a small sword, and that was a weapon that was just really, really popular. I actually have a small sword here. I believe this is 18th or 19th century. I believe this is a 19th century small sword from France, and it is very, very different from the usual fencing weapon. What I also really like is, as you can see in the scenes, they have a thing put on the tip that is called a florette or a bloom, and that is basically to make sure that the end is dull and not sharp as this is. Okay, so as far as the fencing techniques go, it sucks. So Anthony is the focus of the scene, so I think I should focus most on him. So what he does when he fights, he holds his sword very, very high. He holds it like this, which is very high because you can immediately strike someone completely here. And the sixth position is actually like this, and you make sure that you cover basically your entire arm, as well as focusing on that this is being protected, so you can quickly defend yourself. And what he also does really wrong is when he makes his moves, he does it very wide moves, very theatrical, and it makes you very slow because it takes a lot more time for you to get to your target again. And also, bravo on Benedict for saluting correctly. Okay, so the next scene is the Mask of Sorrow, and specifically the training montage. Because when I asked my fellow fencers in my class, as well as the matches, what their favourite fencing scene was in the movie and the most accurate one, most of them actually came with this scene from The Mask of Sorrow. So the ring that they are standing in, I have been informed that the circle that they use is actually a circle that they did use like in old times to train. I haven't been able to find anything about it online, but the people who told me, like, they've been fencing longer than I am alive, so I'll take their word for it, which is really, really interesting, the training wheel. And just okay, so he does the positions. The positions aren't exactly correct, but he is doing positions. It's just not the right positions with the right, not the right movement with the right number. I really love it. I think I'll give it an A tier ranking. So if you want me to react to more fencing scenes, let me know and leave some suggestions down in the comments. And if you are interested in fencing, but you are not entirely sure whether it is really something that you want to do, or you just don't know how to start fencing, just Google for your local fencing classes. And fencing schools are actually really eager for new people to try out the sport. So, there's often a free class, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, where you can just get a feel for the sport. And if you join a fencing club, you can borrow clothing that the club makes available for you, so you don't have to invest immediately in a complete outfit with weapon and mask, even though it's kind of cool if you got one yourself, because it is a bit more comfortable, especially with like hygiene. But yeah, I hope you liked this video. If you liked it, please leave a like, subscribe if you want, and I'll see you next time.